The hardest part about reptiles is knowing what information to trust, separating the good from the bad. But some of the bad information actually really works. Reptile keeping isn't intuitive like keeping a dog or a cat. Most of us understand how to do that. We grow up with those animals. Reptiles are definitely different, and reptile keepers are different too. So sometimes sourcing information is difficult. So today I'm going to give you 10 pieces of bad advice that actually work. Disclaimer, I'm not telling you to follow this advice or even that I follow the advice. I just think it's super interesting how different people do different things, and I trust that you're smart enough to know not to do these things just because some bald guy on a YouTube channel told you these things exist. Let's get started. Number 10, tap water is fine for reptiles. This is something that we read in all the care guides. Make sure you buy purified water, distilled water, reverse osmosis water. Make sure you're putting chemicals in the water to take the chemicals out of the water that you don't want in the water, so only the chemicals that you want in the water are in the water. But here's the thing, if you give them only distilled water or reverse osmosis water, some of the minerals that you want in the water aren't gonna be there anymore. So in my opinion, the best way to do it, if you don't live in Flint, Michigan, okay? If you have water that is suitable for humans to drink, if you test that water and there's not crazy high levels of chlorine in it, you should be fine to give it to your reptiles. Oh, the noise in the back is just Doug. He came in for the year and he's not up. Yeah, he's not. We're making his enclosure, okay? Welcome to Wiccan's Wicked Construction. If you're new to the channel, I promise the room doesn't always look like this. These are gonna look like those. Anyway, I do recommend for certain animals not to use tap water. Frogs and amphibians, obviously. Fish, obviously. Make sure you take any chemicals out, use Prime or whatever you wanna use. But for something like my iguana or my Burmese python or even my leopard geckos, corn snakes, ball pythons, definitely no problem using the tap water that I have in my region. So test your water and make sure it's not abnormal, but normal tap water, at least here in North America by these standards, no problem feeding most reptiles. Just of course, certain species are more sensitive, like amphibians, for example. And also, don't fill your misting system up with tap water. Always use RO water or something else because it will gum up the tap. Number 9, if your snake is not eating, just wait. I mean, realistically, just waiting when your animal isn't eating is a bad piece of advice because if you don't feed your animal's not eating, they're gonna lose weight and eventually die. It's usually a piece of bad advice. However, with certain snakes, like ball pythons, for example, sometimes they just stop eating for short periods of time. For example, Pikachu, one of my ball pythons, he stops eating for 5 months every year, no exceptions, every single year before breeding season starts. He doesn't lose any weight, or if he does, it's like a tiny percentage, 1-2% of his body weight, and that's what you wanna keep an eye on. If your ball python isn't eating, don't freak out. Don't take it to the vet a week or two after. I mean, if it's in good condition, of course. Keep an eye on the snake or whatever animal, and if it starts to lose weight to a point where it's going to become concerning, if it loses, 5, 6, 7% of its body weight, up to 10% of its body weight, then go see a vet. This is for adult animals, of course. However, if your ball python skips 5 or 6 meals, they do that in the winter sometimes. I guarantee you Pikachu this week or sometime next month is going to stop eating. He just does. Usually the end of October, beginning of November. That's just what he does. Number 8, don't give your animal a water bowl. This is terrible advice for most animals, I will say, so don't take this advice. However, certain animals I don't keep a water bowl with. My tree frogs don't keep a water bowl for. Of course, they're in a paludarium, so they have an entire section of water. They're never in it, though. They need water from a misting system and evaporation. Same thing with dart frogs. I don't give a water bowl to my dart frogs, and if I do, it is a very shallow, tiny little bowl, and those are reverse osmosis water that I put for those guys, by the way, not tap water. Even things like bearded dragons, Euromastics, animals like that, I really don't think you need a water bowl. Leopard geckos, I don't think you need a water bowl. I think you'd be okay. My advice is to give you a water bowl, so I am telling you to do it because it's better to be safe than sorry. But if you're misting the animal the way that you should be, that is how they're going to drink the water. And people will tell me all the time, crested geckos, chameleons, and other ones that I don't think you need a water bowl for. Well, I see my chameleon drinking water. As Bill Strand, the godfather of chameleon care modern day, will tell you, if your chameleon is seen drinking standing water, it's because you are not hydrating it properly. Same goes for leopard geckos, crested geckos. This is going to be controversial in the comment section. I'm telling you, any expert of these animals is going to tell you the same thing. If they're drinking water out of a standing dish, it is likely that you are not hydrating them properly. However, if you give them a water bowl, and you're not hydrating them properly, you have a failsafe. And it's not bad for them to drink out of a water bowl. It's just not what you'd ever see them do in nature. Number 7, cohab is fine. Okay, this is a controversial one. This is one that's gonna stir it up a bit. I think for most animals, and for most keepers, you should not cohab your animals, okay? It's a bad idea because if you don't do it properly, things can go wrong. For example, if you keep leopard geckos together in a small enclosure and you find out they're both males because you don't know how to sex them properly, then yeah, you're gonna be getting one of them off the side of the glass with a hose in the morning because they're gonna tear each other apart if you don't set them up properly. If you keep a few females in a 120 gallon or a 5-foot or a 6-foot enclosure, chances are you're going to be fine. However, I recommend that you don't do this unless you really know what you're doing. Become an expert in that species, keep it for a handful of years, observe the behavior, and observe each individual before you even try cohabbing. However, a blanket statement saying cohabbing is bad is stupid because there's things in the world like Stenodactylus, scorpion geckos, garter snakes that all do better together. They are a communal animal and that is how you should keep them. For some reason, leopard geckos are communal in the wild too. You never ever find them alone. Those we keep apart and demonize anyone who doesn't do that. So I think a blanket statement saying cohabbing is fine is stupid, and a blanket statement saying cohabbing is not fine is also stupid. There are nuances. Each individual animal, not only just the species, but the individual, have different needs. Keep in mind, anytime you go against the grain in this hobby, you're gonna hear a lot of noise, but the only thing I hear these days is today's sponsor, Raycon. Thanks Raycon for sponsoring today's episode. It's Raycon's anniversary and the Essential Open earbuds are stealing the spotlight. They're 30% off, and honestly, these have become my best friends for my daily grind. Sleek, smart, and way cooler than your average earbuds. Whether I'm working or commuting or just winding down, they fit right in and make everything a little more fun. What I love is they leave my ear open while delivering crystal clear sound. Makes me feel a lot safer when I'm walking around town or maybe on my one wheel. They aren't in your ear canal, so you can hear traffic or anything else that's going on around you. And you don't lose any sound quality whether you listen to music or your podcast. Plus they're lightweight and don't feel bulky or awkward, which means they're perfect for me when I'm at the gym. Raycon delivers the same premium audio quality as the big brands, but at half the price. And with 3 million satisfied customers and a 30-day money-back guarantee, there's no reason that you should be overpaying. Plus, I use multiple devices and these switch seamlessly. Never mind, the battery life is absolutely insane. So click the link in the description or go to buyraycon.com/WWRopen and get 30% off the Essential Open earbuds. Number 6, don't heat your animals at night. This is highly dependent on the animal that you have. If you have a Euromastix that likes it really warm, Kimberly Rock Monitor, don't just raw dog it, not let your animal have any heat at night, and let your house get down to 65. These animals are not gonna like that. They're not really cold tolerant. There's other animals out there, like corn snakes, for example. If they get to 65 at night, you're fine as long as they can warm up during the day. Redfoot tortoises can get down to 68 at night, whatever you keep your house at, with no heat, be fine. Tree monitors don't do this. Make sure they have heat at night. So most of my animals, I don't add supplementary heat at night because they're in this room where right now it's 82 degrees and it gets down to about 80, between 78 and 80 at night. So I don't need to. However, the animals upstairs that aren't in a reptile room, well, my office is really hot, they're fine. But in the living room, the dart frogs don't get supplementary heat, but the mountain horn dragons do. They have a ceramic heat emitter on them to keep them warm at night. Same with the Kimberly Rock monitors. So the blanket statement, don't heat your animals at night, is a bad one. I mean, use your brain. Some do and some do not need it. Number 5, don't clean your enclosure. The bacteria is good for them. No, the bacteria of feces is not good for your animals. However, what I heard is don't, remove all the substrate. Just like you wouldn't remove 100% of the water for fish and do 100% water change, you do like 30 or 50 or 70%, depending on fish and circumstances, etc. I'm also not a fish expert, so don't take my advice. You know what I'm talking about. I don't think doing a 50% like substrate change, here's the thing. If you have a bioactive substrate and a bioactive enclosure, for certain small animals, you don't need to clean at all, period. In that enclosure back there where I've got all these frogs and lizards, I didn't do any spot cleaning for years. Now I've got an emerald tree boa in there and she makes big dumps. So I do clean it, even though the cleanup crew takes care of it almost in a night. However, I'm never going to just take that substrate out and completely change it. It's unnecessary and defeats the purpose of being bioactive. You want the cleanup crew to do their job. And if the cleanup crew is doing their job, you don't need to change the substrate. However, if you have a bearded dragon with just a bunch of sand and cocoa fiber and all that stuff that I talk about in the care guide and no cleanup crew, then yes, you do need to swap out that substrate, okay? You can't just let them bathe in their own feces bacteria. So the blanket statement is stupid, but with a little bit of nuance, knowing that you're talking about bioactives, I agree, don't change the substrate. Number 4, don't use UVB for any species. Now, I don't agree with this, as you can see by this box full of $2,000 worth of Arcadia lights that I purchased myself. I use UVB for almost all of my animals. As you can see in the back, these enclosures all have UVB lights that's what those are in the box, by the way. So I'm not telling you don't use UVB. However, there are guys out there, guys like Mike's Monitors, Mike Stefani, who I respect to the moon and back. He is the guy in the monitor community. There's very few people on his level. He did a podcast that I listened to recently, and I've heard this from other people too. It's not just one thing I've heard. He doesn't use UVB for any of his monitors at all. He just supplements them and feeds them properly, and he's never had an issue of metabolic bone disease or any of those other ailments that come from not having UVB. In fact, if you supplement them with D3 too much and give them UVB, they can actually have a problem and have hypercalcemia, I think it's called. I don't know. Matt, can you look it up for me when they get too much? Anyway, so the way he does it, I personally don't do. Although I follow every bit of advice that guy will ever give me, and I, love you, Uncle Mike, I personally don't do this. I like to have UVB. I think it's a good idea. We're never gonna replicate the sun. However, we're doing our best with the bulbs. So just because one guy who I really respect does it, doesn't mean that I do it, and the same with you. Just, if I give you a piece of advice that you think is stupid, don't do it, okay? Just don't. Be adults. You're in charge of your own destiny. I'm not at fault if you do something that someone else did because I told you about it. Like, do your own thing. Like, use your brain. Feed just one feeder item for an animal's entire life. This is something that I actually used to do because I got this advice when I was, younger, probably, 15 years ago for leopard geckos. And I watched a very respected leopard gecko breeder that I know very well, who I'm not gonna say because I don't want you to go after this guy. And he only fed mealworms to all of his leopard geckos, and he had thousands of them for their entire life and gave them nothing else. Personally, I don't like this approach. I don't think it's a good idea for most animals to feed them one specific feeder and nothing else. This, of course, changes when it comes to ball pythons, corn snakes, things like that. Most snake species are good feeding on rodents, and that's it. Of course, there are lizard eaters out there, right? The candoyas, for example, that maybe you want to supplement. There are some animals that maybe you want to feed birds to. For things like Burmese pythons, maybe feed them, like a pig for really big ones, and then a rabbit the next week, and then an extra large rat the next week. You can vary it up on certain species, and then certain species you want to keep with one feeder, but for most, especially lizards and insectivores, I don't do this. I like to give all my insect eaters a choice and multiple. So one day I'll feed crickets, then I'll feed some worms, and then I'll feed some roaches, and then maybe I'll feed a little pinky to certain animals, monitors and frilled dragons and stuff, and then I'll go back to crickets. So I change it up, and I think that you should too, although it clearly does work for certain species and certain keepers to feed only one item. I don't recommend it. Number 2, keep your animal in small enclosures because it limits their stress. This almost always is not the case. These are all 360 gallons. There's 3 of them, okay? They're not lit up because I'm not done with them yet. That's what I'm doing after this. So clearly, I prefer big enclosures. This entire room, the smallest enclosure in here, is like 300 gallon. However, for certain animals, wild-caught individuals that have just come in, flighty animals that are very shy, or quarantine situations, I do think that being able to keep an eye on animals necessitates a pretty bare bones, small enclosure. For example, tomorrow, I am getting 80 animals that are coming in from Indonesia. And most of them are going to be set up in very small containers and quarantine environments and terrariums and so forth until I can see that they have no mites, no parasites, no nothing. They're all kept on their own. I'm going to make the video, come out next week. Hit subscribe. It's going to be like 80 animals, dude. That's so many freaking animals. But there's a reason for it. There's a reason for it, and you'll see. I'm really excited to show you. So for specific circumstances, I agree. Keep your animal in small enclosures for their health, but for most animals, I just do not recommend this. I like big enclosures that are naturalistic with plants and everything else, and anyway, this room's gonna look amazing. Number 1, bad advice that does work, don't put plants inside your enclosures. This is one that isn't controversial at all, just some people prefer not to. I just think if you have a bioactive enclosure, you do need plants because that's what's going to use the waste of the cleanup crew that cleans up the waste of the subject animal. Very quickly, in a nutshell, tree monitor poops. The cleanup crew, the isopods, eat that poop. And then the isopods poop, and then that's what fertilizes the plants. So it's kind of like this life cycle, right? Where you don't have to worry about spot cleaning. My monitor, I don't clean the poop at all. Literally the only poop I've ever found in that enclosure was on the glass that I had to clean. The cleanup crew cleans up everything that's on the ground that she poops. However, for certain things like Burmese pythons, reticulated pythons, for example, I made a whole video about how my reticulated pythons destroyed the enclosure that's back there, which they did in one night, by the way. They're just too big, too heavy bodied. It doesn't work. If I had trees, maybe, but I had like alocasias and stuff in there, it just didn't work. So this piece of bad advice is a good piece of advice for heavy bodied animals. For example, I want to put carpet pythons in one of these enclosures. I'm not planting it, save for maybe like a big tree. They look better planted. However, those animals will destroy the enclosure, and that's why I'm not going to do it. Let me know in the comment section below what you think the worst piece of advice is that actually works and might not be so bad.